Good morning, everyone. We are back on a Wednesday morning for our GradChat Cuppa with Parents program. And I must say, we enjoy having these sessions because it's a great time to connect back with you all as our graduates of the Melbourne University who have multiple roles, and I'm sure you have a handful, as we say, and welcome all of you on board. And today we have a panel and very interesting guest speaker as our panelist. So before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the virtual land on which we meet and the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I do acknowledge that because it's a Zoom webinar, we are scattered all over Melbourne, and I pay my respects to the different people of the different nations on which you virtually are viewing this program. We pay our respects to our elders, past and present, and recognize the strength, resilience, and the capacity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait people in this land. So before I introduce my guest, I would like to kind of draw our attention to parents this week, particularly about the importance of Mental Health Week and why we have Mental Health Week and the importance of mental health for our young children and our families. And it's an absolute integral factor of an objective for GSA to support our graduates with their emotional health and well-being, including our graduates and their beautiful families. Because as we say, you look after a person's health, including their mental health and well-being, they're in a much, improved capacity to kind of manage their day-to-day life, nurture their family, look after themselves. And I think we're also living in a society where we can acknowledge that it's no more a taboo or a shame to talk about mental health, that it's important that we access services, we find a friend, a family member to support us through those issues. And there are a whole lot of services out there that can actually support our the support issues related to mental health and well-being. So I'd like to welcome our Associate Professor Erica Frydenberg from the University of Melbourne. And thank you so much, Erica, to have you on board. And I'd like to invite Tavita to introduce Erica and all the parents who are attending the session. Thank you so much for joining us. So over to you, Tavita.
Thanks, Rachna. So I'm very lucky today to have Erica Frydenberg, who is an educational and clinical organizational psychotherapist who has practiced extensively in the Australian educational setting. She's a principal research fellow and associate professor in psychology in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. She's an honorary fellow of the Australian Psychological Society also. She has authored and co-authored over 150 academic journal articles and chapters in the field of coping, developed psychological instruments to measure coping in children, adolescents, and adults, and authored and co-authored 25 books on topics ranging from early years through to adolescent and parenting. Her most recent volumes include Promoting Wellbeing in the Preschool Years, that was in 2020, this year actually, and Adolescent Coping, Promoting Resilience and Wellbeing, which was last year, 2019. And equally, and another one, Coping and the Challenge of Resilience, which was 2017. She's received numerous Australian Research Council and philanthropic grants, and has been engaged as a consultant with organizations such as the National Health and Medical Research Council, Development of Education, Catholic Education Authority, and the Victorian Assessment and Curriculum Authority. She was the recipient of the Distinguished Scholar Award of the American Educational Research Association, Special Interest Group Stress and Coping Education, the University of Melbourne Medal of Research Excellence, Faculty of Education Award, and the University of Melbourne Knowledge Transfer Award. In 2013, she was the recipient of the Lifetime Career Award of the Stress Anxiety Research Society, an international body of researchers and practitioners. In 2018, she delivered the Charles Donald Spielberg Address at the annual meeting of Stress Anxiety Research Society. So please welcome Erica. Thanks so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, and welcome to all those who are online. I look forward to sharing what I know with you, and hopefully get some good ideas from you as well. Because all that introduction, which was very generous, thank you, Tavita, but really all it adds up to is that I've been working in the field of stress and coping for a long time. And I work across multi-age groups from the early years through to old age, because the core principles of how we deal with stress remain the same. Pretty much regardless of age, there are some core principles that I would want to share with you that you can then think about in terms of your current context and situation. So that's really my focus today, is to first share some key core ideas with you and then start thinking about how that might meet your needs. A beautiful autumn setting, because that's really the period of time we're in. But one of the very interesting webinars that I did last week was about the environment and nature and how that helps us to cope. And regardless of whether we're in lockdown and limited in our capacity to go into the outdoors, how we can actually utilize images of nature to actually as a source of relaxation and as a source of pleasure, whether it's on our screens, whether it's outside our windows, or whether it's indoor plants. So that's something that I became very strongly aware of in the last week, and I thought I'd share that with you on that slide. And also in the corner there, I put that little sort of image around graduation planner, because I believe we're talking to students of the university. And one of the things that's really important in all situations, but perhaps in this time of lockdown, is to be looking forward, both for you and your child. How do you stay hopeful, optimistic, and plan something that's somewhere in the future? And it can be in the immediate future, as of, you know, tomorrow or next week, or some time away. And when you're thinking of graduation, I think that, you know, is your motivator. So we do need things that are motivators, that help us look forward to something and give us hope. It's a very, very important element of coping. Okay, here we are. Families Coping is a book that I did write in 2015, and we've been running parenting programs. I don't know if any of the audience have participated at the Early Learning Centre at the University of Melbourne, but in that book I really put everything that I know that's good about stress, managing stress, because I always use the word coping straight after using stress, because stress is a normal part of everyday life, and it may vary according to situations, but how we cope is what matters. How we see the situation and what coping resources we build up and what coping resources we draw upon. Okay, I think the slides well, very firstly, in all circumstances, we need to meet our basic needs, whether it's food or shelter, and safety before we can move forward. And I suppose in this circumstance, for a lot of us, and it's been very clear that people have been anxious. Parents are anxious and children are anxious. I do want to say that one of the key elements of coping is how adults cope really determines how children cope. I would be saying this to teachers, I would be saying this to parents, I would say this to managers. So how we look at our own coping determines how others cope. And I guess there is a measure of anxiety in the community in the adult community, but very likely also in the child community. And how you manage that anxiety is really important. Now, I know there's been so much written about managing stress in this time of COVID-19, and I'm hoping that I just don't repeat everything you might have heard, so I might gloss over things rather quickly. But one of the important ways of managing stress is to look at how we use information, how much media, social media, electronic media, television, visual media that we use, because we have control over how much input we have in terms of what stresses us. For some people, reading extensively about a situation is helpful. For others, it's stress-inducing. So you'd want to be thinking about how that information is affecting you, how is it affecting your child, and really reducing the opportunity to be exposed to that stress is important. What is helpful and what is unhelpful coping is really what I want to cover, because in all circumstances, we know what is helpful coping strategies and what are the less helpful coping strategies. We want to learn or continue or develop the use of the helpful ones and reduce the use of the unhelpful ones. So my next few slides are really identifying those strategies. And you'd want to be thinking about how much you use a particular helpful coping strategy and can you use it more, and so on. Okay. When it comes to working with your children or working with yourselves, we all know that working with strengths. So thinking in terms of what are the strong points, what are the strong points, the things that we can affirm our children for, and that's in all circumstances. We want to be working from our own strengths and then also doing that for our children. Self-care, and I know you would have heard lots about self-care, how we look after ourselves, how we, in the normal work life, how we balance our work. In your situation, it might be studies and family life, and where it comes to leisure. And that's really important when it comes to parenting, because we do need to find our particular ways of being able to look after ourselves and giving us some opportunities for leisure and relaxation. And I know that when we talk to graduate students, especially those who are parents, there's often the notion that we're time poor. And really, self-care does not have to be an excessive use of time. It's more identifying what is it that I find relaxing and what can I manage well. Okay, everybody has been talking and telling us routines when your children are not at school and you are at home and homeschooling them. Daily routines. I think it's really important, and I guess because you're graduate students, you would have had success at school, and you most probably have worked with diaries, daily diaries, weekly diaries. But I think what's important for young children, and I know I recall a 6-year-old, 5-year-old boy, for him, he really needed to know, what are we doing tomorrow? And here we are in lockdown, but it means that just like you might, in terms of your study schedule or work schedule, need to know what you're doing today and what you're doing tomorrow, so children often need to do that. And one of the things that I find most helpful for me as an adult is to be able to fill out that diary and be able to tick off when I've actually achieved things, so that when you're in this stay-at-home mode with your children, you can feel the satisfaction that you have accomplished some of the things that are on your diary. I find that if I don't achieve what I set out to achieve for the day, it goes on to the next day and so on. Now, I guess it's really more important than ever because you're really most probably juggling two life circumstances at the moment, both being a parent at home and being a student at home. And like I mentioned in the first slide about nature, and certainly families coping, we talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness, being able to relax and staying in the moment. So being able to focus on the moment, but mindfulness is ever so important, not just for relaxation, but also for us being realistic. Today is today. What am I doing today? To be able to focus on that, because one of the least helpful coping strategies is worrying. And when I mention it, I'll show you the slide a little later, worrying is really about focusing on the future. And I think we do need to be able to do the stop, think, let's stay in the present. Okay. What is coping? Coping in real simple terms is both our thinking, our feeling, and our actions. And I could show you some complicated graphics, but really what we want to do is sometimes tackle what we're thinking, sometimes we want to tackle how we're feeling, and that can impact our actions. For instance, if I feel that giving myself a treat, whether it's looking at my favorite television show or having a scoop of ice cream, and it's going to make me feel better, I'm going to feel more positive, and it's likely to help me to act in a different way. So we can tackle the way we think, we can tackle the way we feel, and we can tackle the way we act. And that's really thoughts, feelings, and actions with whatever comes your way. It's how we see a situation and really being prepared, and I suppose, and planning and constructing a path of action. I guess we've been in this lockdown for multiple weeks, and you may in fact have a path of action, and you may be already in a routine. But one of the things that I always talk about, and I think this lockdown has created an opportunity for us to be engaged in discussions with children. And is the routine that you've established working for them and for you? Can you have a conversation about it? And like I mentioned, how adults cope determines how children cope. But really, everything is really a problem, and most problems have a solution. It's how we go about tackling the problem and finding the right solutions. And often children can be very helpful in helping us find the right solution. Okay, so this is what productive coping is, and I'll work through it very, very quickly. But even having a sense of humor and having a laugh is really important. Physical recreation is there because we all know that actually a bit of physical activity has become ever so important at this point of time. Finding a way of creating opportunities for movement. I imagine a lot of you are used to a lot of physical activity, which has been somewhat curtailed. So finding other ways that you can continue to keep your physical fitness in the best way possible. I do find it quite stimulating to see how some of our Olympic athletes have managed to find ways to keep fit in all sorts of creative ways. And let me use the word creative because in coping, being creative is really important. There's no right or wrong coping. It's what's helpful and what's not helpful. But really there are theoretically an infinite number of ways to cope, and how using ideas from other people can be very helpful. And sometimes when I have these interactive sessions, the ideas the parents get from each other is the most useful part of running a program.
Erica, we have a question for you from one of our participants. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so the question is like, my son who is in year 1 is introvert in nature. Since I was homeschooling him and he didn't have to be at school, he's actually performing really well in all his class and gets lots of positive feedback from teachers. Now he's not looking forward to go to school as he's enjoying learning at home. Do you have any strategies to support me to help him transition back to school? So this is just a question to you, and any tips for the parent would be helpful.
Okay. I think that's raised a very interesting issue, that there are unexpected outcomes of this COVID-19 period. A lot of parents talk to me about the silver lining, the opportunity to spend more time with their children, to have them participate in family life in a different way, and so on. In this instance, you're finding that the child's ability to learn is enhanced by being at home in that sort of safe, secure environment. So my guess is that the social relationships are the greatest challenge for that child. And so I'm not sure whether the child has indicated anxiety to you, but I would say, firstly, when children indicate anxiety or fear about the future, one of the things you want to do is to reassure them and say, you understand, but there are ways that we will try and deal with this problem, because everything is a problem. And there will be solutions, ways of returning to school where you might engage with the school and point out what has happened or what you've observed and how best to integrate the child or reintegrate the child into the schooling. It may be that there will be strategies that the school will put into place in terms of assisting him in relationships. There may be things that his teacher, I've forgotten, it's a he or a she, the child has, the teacher has noticed that there are difficulties in the classroom. So as a parent, sharing it with the school teacher, and likely it's to be one teacher or two at the school, and problem solving with the teacher. It would not be a very new problem for a teacher in a prep. I'm not sure whether the child's had a lot of preschool experience, but this is certainly the problem we find in the 3- and 4-year-old kinder when the children first come to school, that not all of them are happy to be in the group situation. And so there are strategies that teachers would use. So the first step would be reassurance that you as a parent are aware of this, that you're going to engage with the school and find helpful strategies to reintroduce the child to school.
Thank you, Erica. That's wonderful.
Okay, so let's look at the non-productive coping strategies. I mentioned worry before, and it's really about the future. And mindfulness has taught us, and a lot of you most probably have done a lot of things that relate to mindfulness, relaxation, meditation, yoga, all those activities that are much more sort of grounding and slowing you down and staying in the present. It really is not a helpful strategy. Sometimes, and I should say that every strategy has some use in life. If you weren't at all worried about your studies, you may not actually be motivated. A little worry can be motivating. Performers in the public arena, like concert pianists, etc., or actors, will tell you that they're always a little bit worried before they go on stage. So a little worry can be helpful if it's your motivator. But what you really need to do is to think, how are you managing your worries? and talking about worries can be helpful. Withdrawing, keeping to oneself is generally not helpful when you have a problem. And so sharing that problem, I suppose, in our sort of normal, regular, everyday lives, we're interacting a lot more with other people. And so sharing becomes a lot easier. I've noticed that I'm much quieter in this lockdown period. I'm working happily and I'm Zooming with people and making phone calls or interacting, but it's much less frequent than in our normal everyday lives. So you may really need to think about when is it good to be sharing and with whom to be sharing, and using the current situation with our contemporary forms of communication to really share when it's appropriate. And of course, if you have a major problem, there is always professional resources available. Blaming oneself, this is really the least helpful coping strategy. When things go wrong, blaming oneself does not help, just stopping and reflecting. So feeling that you're an inadequate parent, inadequate student never helps. I think what you really need to do is to be saying, what's gone wrong? How can I change it? What's the best way to move forward? Ignoring problems. Sometimes, you know, it's okay to block something out and not worry too much about it. But overall, when you're ignoring problems and not tackling them, it's not helpful. So really, that's one of the unhelpful coping strategies. And this one is tension reduction. And we do know that alcohol consumption has gone up during this long lockdown period. And how we release tension. You know, some people express it through physical activity and a bit of, your children most probably release tension through crying. Adults release tension in different ways. But knowing when you're releasing tension to excess and using any of these supports to excess is what's bad. Just being overly anxious about self-image, and we know that that can be problematic. I suppose in lockdown it's almost the reverse. A lot of us are in our trackies a lot more, in our casual gear. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about how you need to get dressed every day and not stay in pajamas. Similarly with children, I know that pajama days can be a fun day, but you don't want every day to be a fun day because it stops being a fun day. Okay, so this is just giving you some visuals on looking at productive coping.
Erica, we have a question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
We have two questions. I may read the first one. Setting short-term goals to look forward to is the hardest part as we are at home during weekdays or weekends. I always feel like the options for a reset button, such as going out for a coffee, planning small trips, do not exist now. So, you know, that ability to think, oh my God, I've got, like, if it's Sunday night and you say, okay, now from Monday, I'm going to do this because I'm going to be back at work or I'm going to have a coffee. How do you kind of think that's any strategies on how to help people reset their goals and come back to, you know, here we're starting again in a COVID-19 time?
Okay, that's a really good question, because for me, my personal life was always one cappuccino for the day. And usually it was in a cafe, because that was my treat for the day. And those sorts of regular treats are not necessarily available. But really what it means is we've now got to stop and think, what would be a self-reward as an alternative? I certainly have my coffee at home every day, and I have gone out to the street and seen the takeaway coffee available, which I haven't indulged in, but essentially it's refocusing on what is the treat. And for each of us, a different thing is a treat. Whether it's your favorite show, whether it's a book, whether it's audio books, whether it's a phone call to a friend. One of the important things that do make us feel better is when we make others feel better. So one of the things that I've been doing is ringing up people who I think need a phone call rather than just the regular people that I would be speaking with. So what I would encourage you to do is almost on a daily basis, if you're doing that diary, what is there in that diary that's a treat? A lot of us have been doing a lot more cooking at home. Well, I guess you most probably, like me, been cooking 3 meals a day at home. What I'm really trying to think about is, what is it that's variety? What is it that's I'm going to enjoy? Or similarly, what is it my child is going to enjoy? And a lot of children and parents have engaged in a lot more cooking. So it's reframing. It means that you do need to have treats, and that's where the self-care comes in. So by all means, think through, what is it that I could be enjoying today?
So Erica, one of the questions is like, as we're going, it's probably nearing week 7 or 8, we're going through it, feeling really less motivated, and quietening, I don't like when you said picking up that phone, not being able to talk to others. And sometimes being a mom, having only 4 hours in a day and for yourself. And even during that 4 hours, you're feeling guilty that, I'm just like, okay, what should I do for my child or the child, not being able to look after myself. And that's a question. Or do you have any tips for that, a parent?
Okay, thank you for that. Guilt is the self-blame. We know long time before this coping research, which started in the 1960s, and more so since the 1980s, which is still a long time ago. But Freud at the turn of the century was talking about guilt. And really, guilt is not helpful, like self-blame. It's a form of feeling bad, blaming yourself. So if you are looking at your work schedule or your relaxation schedule, think about it in a way that is going to make you guilt-free. What is it that's going to look after your children adequately, as well as yourself? So I really think you do need to think about that. Now, I have actually forgotten the first part, Rachna, of your question.
The fact is, I think what people struggle is, the strategies are there, and, people, I think as graduates, people find resources, but I think that lack of motivation of, okay, I've got 4 hours, my child is sleeping, let me do something for myself. But when you're doing that, you're actually feeling, as you pointed out, oh my God, I better sterilize the bottles or, get the washing done. You're always thinking about your children and not actually having time to study or look after yourself. So I think you've answered the question, that not to feel guilty to look after yourself, as that's one tip that you said.
Absolutely. And if 4 hours or whatever time is making you feel guilty, then see it as a problem. How can I do 2 hours here and 2 hours there? So separating 2 hours for myself, find a way that doesn't make you feel guilty. But I think, Rachna, in the beginning, you also raised the issue that it's week 7, or we may even be going into week 8. Yeah. And I must tell you that, for the first few weeks as an academic, I have delighted in this period because I've been able to work very happily remotely, and I've seen the value of it. But only yesterday I started saying, you know what? I'm getting a bit bored.
Yeah.
I haven't had social company. I'm fortunate I've got a partner, my husband, with me, but I realized that, you know, for all of us, even the most positive, and you've been doing great up till now, there could come a bit of a trough.
Yeah.
So let's think of the trough, because the trough is the perfect time to be saying, okay, now let's think of something different and something new. And I think it is important to acknowledge the trough. Now, when it comes, I mean, stress is part of everyday life. And if it goes on for too long and it's too much of it, it can lead to depression. And one of the things I do want to point out is that you do want to stop things in their track early. So just like when I found yesterday that I was feeling bored, I wanted to stop myself from going on a downhill slide. Because if you go on a downhill slide, it's much harder to get up. So look for the signals in yourself when you're feeling like, oh my God, I've had enough of this.
Yeah.
And let's find some other way. Now, the other strategy that's very helpful is social support, so relationships and talking to people. But I always point out to people, and I mentioned that I like to call people who need some particular form of support. But you do want to speak to people who make you feel better. I was talking to a friend the other day who said, oh, so-and-so has rung me and all she does is talk negative, negative, negative. I don't think I can help her. I don't want to talk to her anymore. And I always say, look for help company rather than stress company.
Yeah, it's a very good advice, Erica. And I think even Lifeline in their website talks about, you know, having conversations that lift your mood, and sometimes over-analyzing the COVID-19 to which update you're keeping in the news may not be a very helpful call. So thank you so much, Erica.
That's okay. So look, these were just some visuals around productive coping, and of course working hard, and your children can work hard by playing with their toys and building blocks, and you're obviously working hard as a student. And most probably, I should mention this, that because I also talk to a lot of postgraduate students that we're supervising, that at this point of time, you may not have the amount of time that you are used to having for your research or your work or your studies. But I do know that certainly in my faculty, there are all sorts of allowances that are being made at this point of time. So the young mum that I was talking to, who's a single parent with 3 children, told me how she is really actually enjoying the moment. And she's not making the sort of progress with her work that she would normally make, but that's okay. And there are allowances in terms of the time for submission and so on. So that should actually be a form of reassurance. Let me put time into the things that I need to at the moment, and there will be other ways to deal with situations later. And improving relationships, that's a good one. I do know that at the beginning of COVID-19, a lot of people were concerned about parents, and it's actually provided us with opportunities to improve relationships in rather a very uncomplicated way. Sometimes making a phone call can be hard, but it's often not as hard as when you have to meet somebody face to face. So putting effort into relationships, and some of us who've spent time with a partner, much more time than we're used to, actually have found it helpful. So have parents found it helpful to spend time with their children and really see aspects of their children that they may not have had time to notice in their busy lives. Okay, these are more productive coping strategies. Seeking professional help is really, let me go back to that, is really a way of knowing when you need to ask, and whether it's professional like a supervisor or an academic colleague, or if you're really feeling overly stressed, the Australian Psychological Society is a resource, and I do know that they are doing a lot of online counselling, and it's bulk billed and it's available to you, and I'm sure the university also has resources when you really need help. Social support, and that's an interesting one because normally we do a lot of that in our everyday face-to-face lives, and when COVID-19 it may not be quite as accessible, but really some of us might even be feeling we're zoomed out, but really there are a lot of ways that we can connect with people and feel their support. I know that I've been sending books or little gifts to my friends when they're having birthdays and so on. I can ring them up for help. I can go on a Zoom interaction and so on. So remember that these are helpful coping strategies, and sharing a problem is always a reduction of a problem. Optimism is a very important one. A lot of people use spiritual support, but really I have mentioned being hopeful and seeing the sunshine when it comes out. And I know that we got very excited when after the drought, the rains came. We can also enjoy rain. But I know that when I've actually gone out for a walk and I've seen a flower, I often take a photo these days because I'm actually admiring of the things around me in my environment. Relaxation. Okay, here are the things to avoid. There you are. If you want to think about self-blame, just have that image in your head. Okay. Not coping, there you are, someone in bed developing psychosomatic illnesses. Actually, people have been somewhat healthier during lockdown. There have been far fewer visits to casualty departments in hospitals and fewer flu infections and so on. So there have been other things that have happened. Crying, screaming, tension reduction there. Wishful thinking. Optimism is a way of thinking positively about the future, but if you're not actively engaged in trying to plan for the future, then it's just hoping that things will work out okay, which may be okay to some extent, but in itself, it doesn't solve a problem.
So Erica, just a question here. I feel like kids talk a lot and need a lot of attention. I feel like sometimes I get so exhausted to give constant attention, and sometimes I will not be even aware that my child was talking to me for the last 5 minutes. And I do feel guilty if I don't always listen to what they talk. They may not open up when it's really important. So I think it's this question where, you're over-exhausted and you are actually thinking your child has all this energy talking to you all the time, and you're not able to give attention and feeling that guilt. Any tips on how to let children know, mom and dad need some time, and, not to feel guilty, not to be answering your child all the time?
Yes, okay. The example I often use in parenting is a typical one where you're just rushing off to work. You might need to catch a train, and the child, doesn't want you to leave and says, Mum, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And at that point of time, you can't do it. So what would be the advice is, I know you want to talk about X, Y, Z, but how about we make some time? And so you set a time aside to be totally focused on that child and that problem. And in the example I gave you, it could be when you come back home from work that night. And similarly, at this point of time, when you are totally in the same space, I imagine most of the time, you might want to be able to apportion time, which is whether it's one-on-one or whether it's one-on-3. Every child likes one-on-one, or most children, I would say, do enjoy one-on-one. So looking at your family constellation, your family spaces, your workspace in the family, and setting up some time that's one-on-one. Whether it's to engage with the child in talk or engage with the child in play or a puzzle or a bit of work or whatever, or cooking or whatever. So acknowledging that this is the time for you, Jamie. Let's put it in that diary. So I think it's, once again, everything is a problem, and you want to, you've actually recognized in your example that you're not actually even listening because it's going on so frequently and so uncontrollably. So what you really want to do is to stop and take charge. There is a very simple sort of image, I think it's most probably somewhere in my book. It's like a traffic light, and it's stop, think, do. So when you're confronted with a situation like that, you sort of have to stop and say, okay, what are the possible ways I can deal with it? So I would definitely say that there's a solution to every problem, and just stop, think, do.
Yeah, and I'm just aware we have 10 more minutes, but a last question is, like, I have installed games on my phone so that the kids can play and don't get bored, but every day I feel guilty about screen time. I do have blocks, Legos, slime, Play-Doh, but kids end up spending most of their time on screen. Is it okay to be stressed about that?
Okay, well, the general advice is that screen is not helpful, but at this point of time, children are spending much more time on screen. And certainly you shouldn't be feeling guilty about it. Let's knock that guilt down, but reflecting on how is that screen time apportioned? And when is it working for you, and when is it working for the child? So really establishing patterns with screen time. It really goes down to the routines. Children actually love routine. So thinking about how is your day structured and how is that child's day structured? How can I decide when is the right time for screen and when is the right time not for screen? Definitely, children are much more on screen now, and you will want to reduce that when we're out of this situation. Therefore, establishing a routine or a pattern in the day is a very good way to do that, because you may then return to less time in the morning, or less time during the week, or less time before dinner, whatever your schedule is. Create a screen time schedule and look at it and see, how can I reduce that schedule or reduce time within various components of that schedule.
So Erica, we have about 8 minutes for the session. We'll be wrapping up. So what would be your final kind of advice to us parents who are watching this?
Okay.
I know you have 2 beautiful slides coming up.
Well, this one is really the one that is in the family's coping, but, you know, regardless of COVID-19 or whatever, you're thinking about your own well-being. I go back to how parents cope determines how children cope. Okay? So you've really got to think about your well-being in terms of these areas: the physical, the mental, and the social. Okay, so think about it regardless of the situation you're now finding yourself in. How are you dealing with your physical well-being? How are you dealing with your emotional well-being, managing stress, and how are you dealing with your relational well-being? Because we're all going to come out of this, but we want a maintenance program for the time being. So just remember that. You can draw a circle like that, but what I wanted to do was to show you, you need to think about your well-being into components. And you may want to stop and think about each component, but set achievable goals and celebrate your successes. I think the celebration is really important. I talked about celebrating with some ice cream, but you need to think about what is a celebration for you and what is a celebration for your child. Somebody gave me a statement, and it's not there on the screen, but she said her mother used to always say, the best curve in your body is a smile. And I haven't used that anywhere before, but I share it with you because, you know, a reward for a child can be a smile. A reward can be a hug. And you're very lucky if you have children with you because you can hug them. If you have a partner with you, you can hug, because we really can't be doing the hugging outside. But a smile, a hug, and it doesn't have to be material things. Approval, celebrating success in different ways. So that would be my best message, because if you're looking after yourself and if you're coping well, you're going to be transmitting that in your home environment.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's fantastic resources too that you have.
And there we are, because we've been doing some research with parents who've been keeping diaries. By the way, keeping a diary has been a very successful exercise for a lot of parents. And for adolescents, young people, we've got them to keep a diary for 7 days, and that's another way for you to see how you're coping and think about it. And that doesn't take a lot of time, 2 or 3 minutes a night. And keeping a 7-day diary is something that we've been doing with some adults during this time. But also I've just put up there resources that are available for people to access. And certainly I'm very happy to engage with students or parents or the postgraduate community at the university.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. I mean, it has been so informative, and you know, I think your the research and your experience and you know, sharing it with our cohort has been fantastic. So I, on behalf of GSA, you know, thank you so much for your time and effort that you have taken to share with the graduate parents your tips. And to all the attendees and our panelists who are here, is a big thank you to you for organizing the sessions. Again, you know, Lubna, our GSA family officer, continues to campaign for your issues. So she's a good contact for parents who are listening to this program to talk to her if there are any particular areas that you would like GSA to kind of get guest speakers in. But I think what I'm carrying from Erica is 2 or 3 very, strong messages that I have gathered from this session is really about you're as important as your child, to give yourself the time and not be guilty that, you're a bad parent or not doing enough, because that is important to remain positive, to spread positiveness, and also to understand that I liked that message about a holding period, that this is not going to be, it's surely not going to be there forever. It's a period of time. Use the time for your hugs, and use the time to let your child know how much you love him or her. So thank you so much, Erica, for joining us. These, the slides as well as the information will be recorded, and the slides will be available on our blog session on the website. If not, please contact GSA and we'll be able to send you any additional information. So that's all it is from Rachna here on Wednesday morning, and we look forward to seeing you on next Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and all the best.
Thank you.
Enjoy.